Get started. Rush to their seats. Scramble, 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 scramble.
Ooh, I love your dress. It's a really good dress.
I didn't know we were good. Are we good? We're good. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the GenCon Writer Symposium. We are going to talk today about fighting. How to write fighting, how to talk about fighting, how to describe fighting in a literary or textual format. I'm usually known for having a projecting voice, but we'll go ahead. Yes, thank you. So we'll restart. So yes, welcome to the panel at the GenCon Writer Symposium. We're going to be talking today about fighting, writing fight scenes, doing fights in a clear manner in prose and other mediums so that readers can have fun and live vicariously through our characters. We have a great panel, great panelists today, but real quick, as a contractual obligation, I have to talk about the fact that we have a wonderful anthology with a variety of Writer Symposium submitters.
I think we have a new one just now.
Cat?
I think a baby.
Oh, okay. So a human cat, got it. Anyway, right, there is a wonderful anthology that the Writer Symposium has put out. You can get it either get it in a print format or in a thumb drive, which I do not have one to show off. But the thumb drive is really great because it also has a bunch of additional content, both more books, some audiobooks, several games, all sorts of stuff. So you can get either of those at the kiosk right at the entrance to the symposium. And, oh yes, that is one of the great drives. I got one last year, so very pretty. And
that's the anthology.
That's the anthology, which did not have a copy, so thank you. Couple of fun things. Of course, all these proceeds are used by the symposium to help provide the transit and room and board and stuff for authors that the symposium wants to bring in that can't otherwise afford to come. So you're supporting a great cause. Also, there's a fun game with the print copy of the anthology, the signing page, where you can have all the authors sign. And I believe they're handing out, I think once you fill half of it, you can go get a special ribbon. Half of it? Good, yes. And thank you. Because I hadn't seen one yet. But so it's a fun extra little game you can play as well with the anthology. So, with all of that obligation out of the way, let's have our esteemed panelists introduce themselves. Let's start from the far end. Richard, could you lead us off?
Yeah, I'm Richard Byers. I write fantasy, horror, some superhero stuff. I have a story in the anthology. Last time I checked, there were still a couple copies of my superhero book, The Doom That Came to San Francisco, at the Green Ronin booth. And if you go down to the Crown Plaza and look in the Arkham Horror Room, they have anthologies called Grim Investigations and Dark Origins, each of which has a novella of mine, not the same novella. And so you might want to check this stuff out.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jen Allaway. I am a game writer by trade. I've been doing it for about 10 years. I've worked on some small indie projects, such as 2064 Read-Only Memories and Unavowed. I spent 3.5 years writing visual novels and interactive fiction on Choices Stories You Play, which included a lot of action-heavy books in their catalog and a lot of fight scenes there. And I'm in my AAA era now. I'm writing, I spent a year working on a now canceled Dungeons & Dragons video game, and now I'm at Monolith, where we're making a Wonder Woman game.
There might be some fighting in that.
A little bit.
Awesome. I don't know which.
Yeah, I know. So, yeah, it's like best division of microphones.
Yes. Well, that's a noise. Hi, I'm Brian Duckwitz. I'm a TTRPG writer, freelancer, mostly for Paizo over the last 10 years or so. I've got about 20 credits with them. I taught college English for about 20 years before I got tired of that. one of my students back there. She's not the reason why I don't win. I'm also a fencing coach, modern sport fencing coach. So I'm a 3-weapon coach. I'm a Prevo of épée and foil and a Moniteur of saber. So I've been teaching that for about 17, 18 years as well. And done a little bit of Italian longsword a while ago, but so I've had some hands-on. Now, sport fencing isn't combat fencing, right? But there's some concepts that carry over, so that's why I'm here.
I've fenced for like 25 years.
Cool.
I also did in college. I really loved it.
Right, we've got some fencers.
I'm Howard Andrew Jones. I've written, 4 Pathfinder novels. I had 2 series through St. Martin's. And my new fantasy adventure series is from Bain. The first 2 books are out. Book 3 is coming in October. They signed me for 5, so I'm working on book 4. And I edited Blackgate magazine, and I edited Tales from the Magician's Skull. But probably the reason I'm here, I did do some college fencing myself as well. But I've been practicing martial arts for 20 years, and I guess it was about a year and a half ago I qualified for my 3rd degree black belt in Shotokan karate.
And last but not least, I'm Jamie Garner. I'm your moderator. I write under the pen names J.B. Garner and Amelia Contrail. I have published over my career over 20 novels, edited hundreds. My last release is Indomitable. It's the start of a superhero series, so lots of fighting in there through Ginger Blue Publishing. Also, probably the reason I'm actually here, though, is independently published. I wrote a complete trilogy based around a pro wrestling drama, which is fighting in a sense. So, and has been a bit of a long-standing scholar in that sort of thing. So, let's kind of hit it off with, as especially a lot of you have a real combat experience, if sport combat. How do you feel your knowledge and experience in those realms applies to writing your combat scenes? We'll just kind of start again. Howard, start us down and we'll go down the road.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, I kind of need to select that down.
I tell you, I've been writing since I was in junior high, but I didn't start taking martial arts seriously until I was pretty far along into my adulthood. So I immediately noticed, probably about several months in, that my feeling and choreography of a fight scene felt much more real. Even though I'm generally writing about combat with swords and not any kind of Asian martial arts, it still informs the movements that you're making and your ability to dodge, your ability to think about what your opponent is going to be doing. It was incredibly eye-opening for me, and I'm extremely glad I did it, both for my writing and for my general health. For a guy in his 50s, I feel quite flexible when I see some of my friends who are also in their 50s and are not nearly as flexible. I'm not saying like I'm an incredible pretzel man, just that it's been good for me, and I feel like it's keeping me younger and fitter.
So there's a thing I say to my students that guides a lot of their fencing, and I think it can work as an author to understand that everything in fencing is the daughter of distance. Everything flows out of the distance you're at, right? So if you're out of distance at a point where you can't possibly hit each other, we call that out of distance, right? And then once you start, we have lunge distance. We measure distance based on the action it takes in order to score a touch, right? So if you're at a lunge distance, you need to lunge to hit, etc. And that didn't really, I had my own coaches telling me that, and it didn't really hit home until I was in a tournament, and it's suddenly like, light bulb moment, right? Where you realize that, okay, if they're this close, that means I'm limited to these kinds of actions. So when you're writing fight scenes, if you're thinking about that, how far apart they are, that's really a key element. And then the crossing of distance is where all the danger is, right? To get close enough to be able to score, that's something that you have to do something in order to cross that. that point. So I feel like those concepts are really important when you're thinking about choreographing or blocking out some kind of fight.
Thank you. I realize I kind of buried the lead on like, what combat experience do I have? So I am the daughter of some of the, not the founding members, but one generation below in the SCA. My dad was squire to the guy who wrote the first combat rule book for the SCA, the Society of Creative Anachronism, which is basically people who just want to recreate medieval Europe, mostly. And that includes the fighting styles, and there's most of the SCA is geared around the fighting tournaments, and my dad made his own 16 gauge steel armor, period accurate, right? And went out and it would wear, it's 50 pounds and you would wear it for hours as you are fighting. With a sword as close to safely possible, the weight and balance of a real thing, and thwack each other, right? That started when they were in their 20s, and I was born when my mom was 36. So like I've been around this literally since birth. And I would watch my dad fight and watch him talk about fighting up until they stopped when I was 10 to 12, and I think a lot of people who are like interested in writing fantasy that has a medieval bent to it don't really consider the realities of fighting in armor at all, or even the strategy that's involved with using a shield and sword if you're going that route. So if you're wearing 50 pounds of armor, right, think about how hard it is to move in that, right? If you're wearing a helmet that limits your visibility, that makes you so easy to sneak up on. And when the armor is so loud, like, these are things we kind of make fun of in like, tabletop, you have a disadvantage on stealth checks because of the armor, tee-hee-hee, but like, that was a real thing that cost people lives at that point. And they were wearing it because at the time, that was the safest thing you could do and still be an effective fighter, right? There is a sheer mass and weight to those things that I think when you start delving into that particular field of writing is really worth considering. On the more modern side, I did learn some fencing in college as stated, but I also then recently spent a year doing Muay Thai, and when you're doing more modern fight scenes that are more hand-to-hand, actually spending time, if not watching videos, like going to a class and like doing it, changes so much of your perspective on how to write it, like, clearly, because it's not just about like the actions of I threw a punch, he kicked my rib, ow. Like that's not really what you learn from going to a class. Is you learn the mentality of the sport. You learn the mentality of the fighting style, and that mentality is going to be in your character doing the fighting, right? And that's a really important thing to add.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Richard. I just wanted to jump in and say that I completely agree with that. And I noticed right about when I got my brown belt, when I got into sparring, I no longer had to stop and think, oh, what block do I use? I've been sparring enough that I just automatically began to use the appropriate block. And that was an eye-opener for me as far as writing the fight scenes as well.
Yeah, I think that there's no doubt that knowing something about an actual martial art or a martial sport like modern fencing helps you choreograph the fight scene in detail if that's what you want to do. It is possible, I think, sometimes for some people to get some mileage out of dealing with fights more impressionistically, like with a flurry of savage blows. Conan laid the three guardsmen bloody and dead on the floor, just many heartbeats.
It would be boring if you described every single fight scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I kind of had a period where I would really describe fights, kind of blow by blow by blow. And there were some readers that liked it. And then there were some other readers that said, really, this many pages to describe that fight? So kind of what I do now is I try to, I describe the opening, I kind of give an impressionistic feel in the middle of how it's going, and then to kind of describe the end in detail. And that seems to work pretty well for me. In addition to deciding how detailed you want it, you also kind of have to decide how realistic you want it. Like the example I've given is, probably most people are familiar with Fellowship of the Ring, either as a book or as a movie. And there's the big scene in the big scene in the Mines of Moria where all the orcs and trolls are descending on them, and the hobbits are going to have to fight for the first time, and a lot of orcs get killed in that fight. And in reality, something that happens a lot when people die is that their bowels release. So you've got to, Tolkien had to decide, I assume, since he was in World War I, he's in real combat, is this scene going to be better or worse if there's this stench of feces hanging in the air as the battle unfolds? And he made the decision that, that he didn't want to go there. And similarly, fight scenes in fiction can be flashier than they often are in real life. Aldonati was like the great fencer of the 20th century, fought at least one real duel. And he talked about all the great flashy things that he could do in sport fencing that he couldn't do in that real duel because they were too likely to leave him open and get him killed. Most fights with blades in real life are over fast. And again, you have to decide, do you want the flashy, more protracted stuff because it's cool, or do you want to treat that realistically?
And actually, that segues perfectly into the next topic I wanted to bring up, which is the balance of realism versus the fantastical, especially because I believe all of us work in genres and with elements that are very fantastical, be it magic, be it superheroes, which is like realism on the panel. However we cut it, we're often dealing in speculative fiction and very fantastical elements to our fight scenes. How, I say, each of you come up with, everyone come up with one thing that, a rule or a piece of advice for helping balance the fantastical and the realistic. Let's start with Jennifer. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I'd love to. And actually, I was about to say this to direct reply to you anyway, so it's
hey.
Two birds, one stone. So I think the guiding principle always has to be, what is the fantasy you are giving to the reader? Because even if there's no elves and dwarves, we're all giving a fantasy, right? A mob thriller has a fantasy attached to it. A tournament arc in an anime has a fantasy to it, right? The idea is that the capital F fantasy here is what experience are you promising to the player, right? Or the reader, as the case may be. If I'm promising a Game of Thrones gritty kind of fantasy that's kind of historical fiction with a hat on it, right? Then I'm gonna want to go with a grittier, kind of more punchy, realistic description of combat. And maybe in that case I would mention the smell of feces, because I feel like that would be on brand for Germ. But if I'm doing something more lighthearted, if I'm doing a more kind of whimsical YA approach, then I'm gonna want the emotion of the combat to come through, but we don't need to do every single grim, gory detail. So really, I think it depends on your project and the tone you're going for. You have to think first about what sort of tone and experience that the consumer essentially is expecting out of this. And sometimes you want to subvert expectations, but sometimes it's okay, if they're expecting something in the PG-13 range that only covers XYZ, and ratings is also a very big thing to consider, right? So knowing what you can do in the constraints you have.
Brian.
So, because I mostly write for tabletop RPGs, I don't really choreograph fight scenes, right? That's not a thing that I write, because all that action comes from the players or the GM. So the way it would come up for me though is if I'm designing a feat or an ability or something like that for a character, where I would try to provide a little bit of detail about what that ability looks like and how it operates, right? But not so much that it kind of exactly details what the player character does, right? It gives them room still to kind of use their own interpretation there. So for me, when I'm designing things like that, I try to find that balance, right, of a little bit of detail, and I always try to, when I'm talking in things like this, I always remind players and DMs that you should use those as a guideline to kind of describe what's happening rather than handed down to you. This is exactly what happens every time. You get to do a little of that. In my own games, I once in a while after a big battle or at the end of a boss fight or something, I'll say, all right, describe the kill, or describe how you defeated this person or this thing, and hand over that narrative control to them. So I guess that's how it shows up for me.
Yeah, interpretive fluff.
Yeah, interpretive fluff.
Richard?
So the question is, how do you determine the degree of realism? Like fantasy gives us a tremendous amount of freedom in that. You can do you can write The Hobbit or you can write Game of Thrones, But I think that you kind of set your approach and you can convey to the reader fairly early on what it's going to be, and then you stick with that. I think the worst thing you could do would be to do very suddenly in the middle, and you don't want to be writing kind of PG or PG-13, fantasy, and then in the middle there's a duel where some guy, somebody is gruesomely murdered and horrific,
consistent tone.
detail. Yeah, you want your tone to be consistent, whatever it is.
Howard?
Well, this is all really excellent advice, and I agree with it. I think you have to be consistent in the tone of your magic, and not suddenly pull something out that completely warps everyone's understanding of what you've come before. Lay the groundwork. I tend to write on the lower end of the fantasy spectrum so that the magic can't overwhelm my martial heroes. And if there is a situation where the magic feels like it's going to overwhelm the heroes, then that's a problem that they're getting ready to face, not a sudden surprise. To me, I think the pacing of it is even more important. Choosing when to go into great detail and when not to. Almost like, okay, when am I going to have a close-up versus when am I going to have a far-away shot? When am I going to spend a lot of time on this particular scene? So it's almost as though the combat is a plot element. When is it going to be important and interesting for the reader to see this described in detail? And when is it just going to be something that occurs quickly? We don't want to see, most of us don't want to see the hero blow-by-blow detail every time that they're in a fight. I try to only go into great detail when it's really important and there's something on the line.
May I add one last thing on that?
Please, you may.
And the way that I control that is also, I think, you just have to make room for your own personal writing style in the fight. Like, if you get so mechanical trying to get the fight right that we lose your voice as an author, that's not fun to read. I like to think of, it's not writing, but it's a moment in the Enmei Hakusho in the tournament arc where a character named Hiei is about to do like some really big attack, and the animation style itself warps and gets scratchier and almost more feral, and it's very clear that someone got to run with it, and but it made it so cool to have this moment where someone's voice was so strong in something, and I bet you if we gave 5 of you the same prompt for writing a fight scene, you'd all have a different take on it, right? So don't ever forget to make sure your voice is still in there and how you do things is good, because that's what people are reading for. They're reading for your voice.
I'm actually going to add a little bit to all of this. I think that's one thing that is also important to remember when including these fantastic elements is, it's going to sound very strange, but remembering to use them. It can become, unfortunately, common. I've seen this happen on accident, where a writer they're thinking through a fight scene, and they're thinking through their very logical, grounded, humanistic minds, how a fight would play out, and they forget they've set up these really important, elements, let's say one of the characters has superhuman strength, they seem to forget that. Or one character can fly, yet never flies when they're fighting. That can unfortunately happen. It's like a role-play, it's like a gamer forgetting they forgot they unlocked 7.
There's too many buttons.
I'm just gonna mash attack. But it is important to remember that, because your reader will certainly point it out.
Mm-hmm. which means if you give your character special powers, just make sure that like you put them in constraints where they have to use them. Because if there's no other choice but to use them, you can't forget.
Yes.
That can happen on a much more mundane level too. I've read things where, the writer chooses to describe the fight in detail, which, like as I said previously, is a choice. And so you're, as a reader, you're trying to follow it, and like, okay, the guy was over here, now he's over here, now he's up here doing this, and it's just, the flow is not there. The writer was thinking of a series of cool moments, but not how the character gets around from place to place to place, and you don't want to do that.
Where did you learn how to flash stab? I don't know. I'm actually going to feed off of that. We've talked about some advice, and that was very clear. Like, don't do this. How about what are common pitfalls, like mistakes that you've seen writers or you've done yourself on accident when writing fight scenes that like you can point out for our audience? Let's just start back from the beginning. Howard,
endless endurance. I see this sometimes in movies, but I also see it on the page. The characters just keep going and going, and maybe they'll be lightly wounded, but they just keep going and going, and there's never any real reflection on how they cope with being even lightly wounded, or a little bit of having to force themselves forward mentally. It feels like a bad anime.
I think that plays well with when you were talking earlier, Jennifer, about the weight of armor and things like that. That builds into all of that.
Absolutely. I guess I'll go now and
Yeah,
pass to Richard Ryan. So I really feel like one of the easiest mistakes is, frankly, just not doing research on the martial art that you are featuring in your fight scenes and what that does, both in terms of like the physicality, but also, like I said earlier, the mental, and just like how it changes the scene. So like, for example, fencing to me is a sport of deception. Like, you really don't do a lot of moving. It's just when you move, it's very calculated, and you're doing the like donkey space of like, I think that you think that I think that you think. Like, that's what fencing is to me. And if I'm reading a book that's about fencers and that isn't brought up, then it just kind of feels like it's sort of like playing fan fiction in a space, but not like taking it seriously. You know what I mean? And gosh, there was something else I had that was different and possibly better, but it's out of my head now. So I'll hand the mic back over. If it comes back, it comes back.
Yep. Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I'll give you a tip that applies to writing fights, specifically in big battle scenes. A lot of times people will try to do that, and the story is written in the point of view of one particular character. Maybe a guy who's like fighting on the front line, and it's like, if you're in that character's point of view, under normal circumstances, you probably can't see the overall thing that's happening in the battle. You just can't do it. But people I've seen, the yield to the temptation. Well, I've got to describe. I've got to describe what's going on overall in the battle. Well, if your viewpoint character can't see it, you don't describe it at that point. If he can see it, then if you can work out a way for him to see it, that's good. One of the good things about writing the Brotherhood of the Griffin series that I wrote for Forgotten Realms was that it was about this elite mercenary group that become a leader of Griffin riders. So they have these flying mounts. So my viewpoint character could get up above the battle and see how it's going overall, then fly down and get in some savage fight, and that works well. But you need some kind of gimmick like that.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Swords did not weigh 20 pounds. There are some ceremonial parade swords that are like 8 feet long that you might carry in a parade that weigh 20 pounds, but a sword, if we're talking typical long sword, which can mean a whole bunch of things, 4 to 5 pounds maybe. And so that a lot of these ideas about how sword fighting works came from the Victorian era, where they kind of looked back at things that had come before and they're like, oh, well, the way we've reached the peak of civilization, and the way that we do things now is the best it's ever been and ever will be. So they must have not have known what they're doing. So there's that element of the weights of things, like Jennifer was talking about with armor. The story I love about armor is Henry VIII would do sixth or fifth would do cartwheels in armor, right? Like if you were trained in it and strong and knew what you were doing, you could move. You might not be able to see very well, but you can move. And yeah, all these little things. You know, the thing in the middle of the blade is not a blood groove. It's called a fuller. It's designed to remove weight without removing strength. You know, like there's these things that just what you're saying. You've got to know. Like you've got to do the research to know what the real deal is. You've got a really huge benefit now. You can watch YouTube videos of people doing HEMA, you know, historical European martial arts, or any number of martial arts. There's a great series about a kendo master who's like taking some European weapons and trying them out and seeing what he can do with them, right? It's really cool. So there's all that kind of stuff. You know, the other thing I'll say is that the human body only moves in a certain number of ways. There's only so many ways to swing a sword, right? So there's a universality to a lot of fighting that happens just because of the nature of how our bodies work.
Yeah.
So thinking about that stuff is really useful.
Absolutely. I remember the thing.
Oh, good.
Good.
People forget, so people who have not been in a fight before, like either in a bout or in any kind of like tussle, they don't realize that when you get in a fight, even if you are experienced, a certain amount of panic and adrenaline sets in, and you don't think smart all the time. Like, I think what really bothers me when I see fight scenes in books is when people are like new to fighting or still figuring out, like they're going on their training arc, and then they get in their first fight and they're still able to think clearly and track 5 things. No, you tunnel vision. You think of the thing that's gonna kill you right now, you stop it from happening, and like, you know, Godzilla could walk by beside you and you'd be like, who? I wasn't trying not to die. Like, you kind of get stupid when the adrenaline kicks in and you don't always remember all the like theory and the like, oh, I know if I want to counter this punch, I gotta do this. Like, you know, you don't have that level of cognitive, you know, the reason why masters are masters at their sport is because it's so deeply ingrained into them, they're not thinking. Because the act of just being present and trying not to die takes so much work that you can't actually think about technique and stuff. That's why they train so much. So if your person's brand new to fighting and they're like, I can see all the, it's like, no. That's not how this works.
Blind panic.
Can I say one more thing about it?
Sure.
I'm a big Star Wars fan. My favorite battle in all Star Wars is from Empire Strikes Back with Luke and Vader. Because Luke just came off of 3 months of training and all of a sudden he's like, I can do it. And runs off to Cloud City, right? And gets in this fight with Vader, and the storytelling there is so beautiful because when they ignite their lightsabers, Luke is like, got 2 hands on it and Vader's just got 1 hand. And he's just, casually parrying, doing all these really simple, easy little motions, and you can see that storytelling happening, right? And that very simple distinction between their fighting styles, that just tells the story right there of what's happening. There's a reason they didn't used to put music behind those lightsaber battles, because that was the music, is the sound of the blades humming, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that stuff.
I just want to say one thing. I just want to say that I agree with Jennifer, what Jennifer said, and that you can err on the other side of it too. When I did Brotherhood of the Griffin for one book, I had this editor who was new to Wizards of the Coast, and I think kind of new to the whole military fantasy thing, and she wanted all my characters, who are these highly competent, extremely experienced mercenary soldiers, to kind of be in this constant state of near panic in the fights, and I was like, no, they wouldn't be like that. So
yeah, on that side of things, definitely not. Yeah.
So you can err on one side or the other depending what kind of character you're writing about.
Well, absolutely, and I mentioned earlier. I mentioned earlier that around the time I got my brown belt, I suddenly noticed that I wasn't panicking anymore. Oh, what block do I use during this sparring? It just began to happen. Not that I'm a master now. I mean, I don't spar that often anymore, probably because I don't like getting clocked in the head anymore, being middle-aged.
It's fair.
Right. But there comes a point when you rehearse like that, where the movements, you're not thinking about them necessarily more, they become more natural to you. And imagine what it's like if you're an actual veteran of actual combat. You've done this enough times, you're not going to be panicking over that stuff, maybe later, but not in the middle of it, because you're geared to survive at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more about knowing when to panic, right? Like,
Right.
you know, not a complete Allaway. I also do a lot of LARP, and my LARP uses bot for combat and stuff along with storytelling. And no one freaks out until the people whose characters have been around for 30 years and are like more powerful than God are like, if those characters are like, Jesus is bad, then it's like, okay, now I'm gonna panic. They're the barometer.
So I'm just going to say one little bit just to add to all this, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. Just one thing, a little bit I would add to like advice is remember that combat, especially like personal one-on-one combat, is intimate. You are so close, and especially if you're hand-to-hand fighting, you may wind up knowing your opponent's body better than their partner or spouse does. Because you're right up in there, you are interacting in ways that people do not normally interact, you're breaking personal bubbles. And you could play into that. I mean, it's the classic romantic sparring trope. It exists for a reason. But in ways other than romantic intimacy, it is a very visceral, intimate experience. I do have a little smidge of experience, and that's a lot less than everyone else, but enough for me to know. And you can play that forward in adding to the drama of combat. I think a good main way to think of it is combat is intimate, war is impersonal.
That's nicely said.
Yeah, the generals who are moving things, they are not seeing these as people, but when you are the soldier on the front line, it's an intimate experience fighting your opponents.
Just kind of a more general case of what you just said is that don't get so caught up in describing the moves and the choreography and everything that you forget the inner life of your viewpoint character who is
or the
experiencing
stakes,
this moment
the
by
emotion.
moment.
Yeah, that is very important to all of that.
Yeah, don't lose the story for the scene.
Absolutely. So questions. We've got, I think, 10 minutes, which is perfect for questions. Right there.
A general rule I've heard a lot is that one of the best ways to edit yourself is to read the story out loud or have somebody else read your story out loud. Mm-hmm. However, fight scenes seem to me to be more visual. So do you find it more useful to know how your fight scene is reading, or the images that it produces with the reader? Is visualizing it more useful than hearing it read?
I read all of my things over and over multiple times as I'm drafting, and I think I'm visualizing as I'm reading it out loud. I mean, you read out loud so that you don't accidentally have a bunch of rhymes in it, and so that you don't repeat the same word and other things like that.
Also, you use other parts of your brain, so you see typos.
Right, you see typos. But yes, if you're reading it, if you're not speed reading it, then you're trying to visualize it as you go, and I think that helps too. I mean, I am fully behind reading it out loud for all those reasons, and one is to make sure that the movements of the characters are making sense.
Anyone else want to add to that?
It seems like a personal process thing. Like if storyboarding out what the fight looks like in your head helps you to write it, then do that. I've never personally felt the need to do that, but in my review processes, working in a team, like, as a game writer, I am never the sole writer. There's always a team of people, if not other writers, which usually there are, then also like artists look at it and level designers and all these other people look at it, right? So usually by the time you get 20 people down the pipe, if it's not visualizing well, we catch it somewhere before person 20. But in a more intimate sort of individual practice, I think at that point you just got to do what works for you. And whatever gets you the best feedback of people being like, yeah, I really see this fight.
Let me jump in real quick. We were talking about storyboarding. I outline my fight scenes pretty carefully before I write them. That way I don't sit there like, oh, what should he do next? I outline in detail, almost like a screenplay, before I write it, so that I don't get slowed down when I'm trying to get the momentum and the excitement going in the prose. I've got all of the stuff that's going to happen figured out already, and that helps me bring it to better life.
Yeah, you can walk it through too, right? Like just see what it feels like to do those movements to some degree.
Yeah, I was just to say from my personal experience, yeah, generally it's all visual, but there have been times when like I do stand up and do specific actions like, okay, that would work, okay, and then move on. So again, personal process. Right? Front, and then we'll get to you.
Who are some authors whose action scenes you enjoy reading, the ones you think are worthy of imitation, or us reading them?
Well, I really enjoy the work of Bernard Cornwell, who's a historical adventure writer. I think he writes very good fight scenes, probably as well as anybody currently writing.
I mean, I was definitely raised bread and butter, like 80s, 90s sword and sorcery, and I feel, I knocked George R. R. Martin earlier, but like, I tease, but like his work in the books, like, and I know the last half of the Game of Thrones TV show sucked, but like the books hold up and have some pretty amazing fight scenes. I know Joe Abercrombie also does it really well. I've really enjoyed that as well.
Growing up, R.A. Salvatore's Driss stuff, right? Like there are some pretty exciting things. I like Robert Jordan's fight scenes too. I don't know, some interesting things. He gives everything a funny name, like the crane walks through the water or whatever, so he doesn't have to always describe exactly what it looks like. But yeah, I'd say that.
I'm going to go even further back and recommend the creator of Conan, Robert E. Howard, who writes wonderful personal man-to-man scenes, but can effortlessly switch to big overview scenes so that you're swept up and get a feel for the overall battle. Several of his stories are very good for revisiting both movements of large troops. He's one of the few that I can read movements of large troops and actually imagine what the battlefield is looking like.
Yeah, to get at least a modern name in there. N.K. Jemisin in the Broken Earth series is really, really good. It's not like heavy on fight scenes, but it has a lot of very heavy scenes of conflict and fighting that I think are told masterfully.
I'm glad Jennifer said something modern because I was just going to say Howard again, and then so someone's prepping.
Cornwell's modern, he's still writing.
Also, Anne Leckie and the Ancillary Justice series, they have a few fight scenes in there. Because I don't read books that are like only fight scenes. I see fight scenes as like, you know, a piece of a puzzle to get to something,
They're
right?
always
So,
a spice.
so I'm just like, what books did I read? Well, that's not a fight scene book, but anyway.
Yeah, it's true that books can't be solely fighting because, you know, God knows I've tried, but you know, sooner or later you get to a point where a character has to think or talk or something.
Darn, thinking.
My question has to do with non-human creatures in fighting. How do you change what you're doing when you're hitting the back? Or how does it change?
Well, they would have someone's about.
Oh, I love writing non-human things and fighting. Like, I do it mostly in my personal project. I haven't gotten any of them out into publishing, but like, basically, you know, I sort of put myself on the opposite side of it. At one point, I had this sort of like, I'm gonna call it like a vine tentacle dryad monster situation of just like, it's a humanoid figure, but they have just like kind of the, you know, the shadow monster from Princess Mononoke, just like the tendrils of stuff that can lash out. And so when you're in that situation, it's like, okay, put yourself against that. They're gonna move really fast and fluid. They're gonna have that like crawly kind of motion with the dozens of things. They're gonna be low to the ground. They're not gonna be hit. Basically, you have to do a like physical evaluation of that thing as your opponent and find the like realistic grounded details about it that make fighting it feel a little more realistic. So, you know, with this one, it's the way it did its kills was it got up to you and it shoved a vine down the throat and then ripped out. And so it just ripped a line down from throat to basically the sternum. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for if that was too graphic.
It's all good, but I'm picturing it.
minutes. Oh.
Yeah, no,
That's what we're here for.
Okay, no, yeah,
It's as if
no.
our panel are storytellers.
Yeah, no, I always aspire to like the Castlevania anime level of like, you see it and you go, ugh, nice. Like that sequence.
I think something depends on whether it's a world where your protagonists, your human fighters or elf fighters, are familiar with the non-human threat, or if they're not. You know, I mean, somebody who is encountering trolls for the first time and didn't know trolls were in the world is going to be pretty freaked out about it. Somebody who knows that, you know, okay, trolls are out there, and then you know, their martial training is going to include techniques for dealing with that kind of creature.
I'm going to throw in a quick, well, this is not a dumb thing, this is actually my advice also, like, as a lot of monstrous supernatural things and forms are kind of based on actual, like, living creatures, we modify them. It's gonna sound kind of ridiculous. Look up animals attack and videos like that on YouTube and see how actual animals move and fight and attack,
Yes.
and then you can adapt that to these supernatural things.
Yes, nature documentaries.
Yes.
It's one thing to say a tiger does 1d8 points of slashing damage. It's another to watch a tiger take something down and think about fighting that. Oh, no thank you. I'm not fighting a bear, are you kidding?
Yep.
Yeah.
We've got 4 minutes. I think that's time for 1 or 2 more good questions. There.
So, especially Howard, you talked about fencing in the distance, like, or was that?
Oh, that was
That was Brian.
So I guess obviously the distance matters when you're a few feet apart. I'm curious, how do you guys pull that back when you're looking at distances like not like a few hundred yards, like if you're sniper or like in miles or tens of thousands of miles of like space combat? I'm curious what that was like.
Go ahead.
I think that would be knowing the limitations of the weapon that you're using. It's not just your personal strike distance, it's the strike distance of whatever, if it's space, how far can that phaser go, right?
What's in the way, you know, what's the atmospheric conditions, all that stuff that you'd have to think about. Bullet drop.
Yeah, I love when science fiction remembers to include actual science.
Right?
I'm normally, like I said, the kind of within the constraints of a particular scene, and the one character point of view guy. So whether you're fighting over long distances in outer space with energy weapons, or up close and personal with swords, my stories are going to be centered in the head of that character who's looking out and seeing what's going on.
Yeah.
I think one last bit that I'll add is it all comes down to because we talked about this a lot earlier, establishing the parameters, I think as Howard said, and the stakes. Like Jennifer said, if we know the stakes and parameters, you can still keep the same sorts of tension and intimacy and stuff, even if they're fighting from miles away, because they know each other's capability. Like I can, it's this. You said a sniper, which is a great idea of it. Yes, they are a mile apart, but they know that mile provides no safety, and they've got to figure out how to counterplay each other. It's just finding that switch that makes it a tense situation and then cranking on it.
Yeah. Was anyone here at my sex scene workshop yesterday?
Last year.
Oh, last year. Hey! I thought I saw some familiar faces. I talk a lot in that one about like pulling on the levers of different situations. You can have a physical release without having an emotional release, and vice versa, right? And so you have to really think about what your fight scene is like emotionally and metaphorically doing in the book. Why is this fight scene happening? Where do we need to be at the end of the fight scene to get the story to progress the way you want it to progress, right? And you have to really ask those big metaphorical questions before you can get to the choreography, because that's what has to be at the heart of every single word in that scene.
I think it's actually a really good finals thing for wrapping up on, because we are about out of time. Please, I'd like a round of applause for our esteemed panelists, please.
For our lovely moderator.
I think several of us have bookmarks and business cards and the like, feel free, if you've got a few minutes while we're clearing out, if you want to come up and talk to anyone, we're here until they throw us out, so please. And thank all of you for coming. You made a great panel.